Alright guys, so my name is Seth Harrell with HBR Powersports. We're located in Murray, Kentucky. Do a lot of suspension work and dirt bike repairs in general. But today, as the title says, we're going to be going over this KYB SSS fork. This is off of Yz250. A lot of these SSS forks are very, very similar. But we're going to be opening this thing up and showing you how to rebuild it. And not only that, we're going to get a little bit deeper into valving, how that works. If that's foreign to you, this video is going to be very beneficial. But if throughout this video at any time you get confused, you decide you don't want to do this stuff, I've put our phone number and info in the description, so give us a shout. Our price is $75 for a general rebuild, $100 to revalve it, and anything else, parts. But without talking too much, we're going to go ahead and open this thing up and show you how it's done. So we'll put it in our vise here and open this top cap. Okay, so we've got our fork in the vise. This is our cap tool. This is what we're going to use to loosen the top here. So as we open this up, unscrew it all the way. Take our fork out of the vise. And then we're going to slide this down and we're going to drain all of this oil out of here. Now that we've got all the oil out of this fork, our next step is to loosen this 17 millimeter here on the bottom. You don't have to run the clicker out all the way on these because these are just on the cart or on the damping rod. It's just a circle. Some of like the Showas and stuff have a D shape where these sit in there where the clicker turns it. But these do not. These are just kind of spring tensioned as this clicker runs in and out. So it's not a big deal if you loosen those. You can if you want to. So we're going to loosen that up and then go from there. Okay, so now we've got this 17 millimeter loosened up. What we're going to do is take our fork. We're going to pull down on this, opening this up here, and with our cartridge rod holding tool, we're going to stick it right there so that we can unscrew this. You see, that's under the rod there holding this up. So this right here on a KYB is a 15 millimeter. You're going to grab a wrench and then you're going to loosen this 17 and pull this cap off. Off camera real quick, I have broken this loose with my 15 here and then a 17 loosening this piece up here. So we're going to pull this off. Set it aside. Obviously, a lot of times these are going to be full of dirt in here, so make sure your forks, again, are clean. If they're not, you can take a seal pick or something, dig that dirt out, spray it out real good, make sure it's clean because all that stuff is going to go down into your fork, guys, so you don't want that. It's just more cleaning than is necessary. It's hard to get all that stuff out, so also pull your damping rod out. Guys, if you're new to this, make sure that you know where all this stuff goes as you're pulling it apart. I rebuilt 1,000 of these KYB forks, so I could, pick them up from a pile of scrap metal and know where everything goes, so it's not too detrimental to me. But now your fork tube, your outer tube is just going to come right out. Your spring. So if you're changing springs right here, you're pretty much done. You just put the new spring on, put it back together if you don't need seals. These on this model come stock with a 44 kilogram spring. But now we're going to open up our inner cartridge. We're going to get all the oil off this, just kind of wipe it down, and then put it in our cartridge holding tool and break it apart. So I forgot to add, before you put this in your vise with your soft jaws or whatever you use, if you've got a cartridge tool, or not a cartridge tool, but a fork vise or something, you want to pull this piece off. A lot of times these are ran down tight on the bottom, so if you have to put it in a set of clamps like these are specific to forks or cartridge rods, that's the way to get that off. Right. This just makes it easier. It can be done without these, without the fancy tools and stuff, but Obviously, if you're a suspension shop or if you're doing this a lot, this right here is a major investment. So now that's where our fork cap tool, cartridge tool right there will go in, and it just takes a wrench. So at the same time you're doing that, you'll have to hold your outer cartridge while you loosen this up. Guys, these are not generally super tight unless they're just, you know, stuck. If that O-ring gets, you know, down in there, swells up, stuff like that. So, all right, so now we see that it's all the way loose. It's just spinning now at this point. So we're gonna push up on our cartridge rod, and it's gonna help this to come out. Now be careful, because we've got that cap off at the bottom of our rod. If you just pull this, your whole rod will come out and you get fluid everywhere, or fork oil everywhere. There's gonna be some suction to this. If there's not, that's a sign you might need some seals on this free piston or something like that. So that suction is a good thing. It needs to be a little bit difficult to come out. So here's what we've got. This right here is our base valve. You can see there's your piston and there's your shim stack, all your valving. That's what controls your oil flow coming through this piston. Okay, so from the factory, these are gonna be peened, and what that means is this shaft here, where the nut goes down on it, is gonna be basically kind of flattened out over the nut. You're gonna have to grind that off, smooth it out so that you can back the nut off. If you don't do that, you're gonna strip something, you're gonna break the rod, you know, endless possibilities of screwing things up. So we've already got that done because this has been revalved, but we've got some Loctite on here. So we're just gonna have to break that loose, and then that is our valving there. And so we're gonna get into the valving part now. That's a 10mm nut on the end of that. Generally, these are not very tight because you can't get them super tight without stripping them. You'll have to refer to your manufacturer's torque specs for the proper torque, obviously. So, yeah, this Loctite's done a good job because this has got a lot of resistance on it. But as you go, you can kind of, as you loosen it, kind of back it up a little bit. That way you're not jamming up the threads. Okay, so here's what we've got on our base valve. Once you take the nut off, we got these two pieces, a spring and this collar here that sit down on it. Okay, so we're gonna pull these off. Like I say, especially if you've never worked on these forks before or never done anything like this, set these in order so that you're gonna know, have everything organized. That's our top plate on top of the piston. And then you're gonna have another little collar here. We got a little bit of Loctite kind of holding it up, but that collar will pull out and then your piston and everything else comes off. Okay, so now that we've got our piston and everything off, here is your shim stack. You can see these little ridges here. These are a bunch of tiny little washers. If you're not familiar with shim stacks, all of these, when your piston, oil flows through these passages. Sorry if you can see that. All these ports here, oil will flow through. So this is all hydraulic. And as the oil flows through the piston, it bends your shims. Oh, sorry, focus there. It will bend these shims downwards. And so this is what controls your damping. And rebound works, you know, in the same way. There's no rebound stack on a base valve, obviously. That's going to be in your mid valve. But that's the basic concept of how shim stacks work. These all bend over your smallest bottom shim down here. So what we can do is pull these off. This one has been revalved, like I say, so it's a bit different than stock. We got a crossover there in between our face shims, and then all these shims taper downwards. So what you would do, you'd lay all these out, and then whatever way you're gonna revalve it for, you know, motocross, woods, enduro, whatever you're doing, you'll put your new shim stack on there. Obviously, guys, I'm not gonna give you a shim stack. Every application is different. This one's kind of a cross-country, decent B-rider setup. And so everything is different. There's no one size fits all for suspension. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone over the base valve, the next step is your mid valve. So you take your inner cartridge, you're gonna dump that fluid out of there. And like we talked about, we've already got the nut off of this cartridge end here, this rod. And so we can just slide that through. It'll come right out of your inner cartridge. This here is your mid valve. It's real similar to a base valve. However, this piston has shim stacks on both sides of it. Now this here on the bottom, it's hard to see, but there's a ton of shims in here. What that is that's your compression stack on the bottom. So when this is in the fork, your fork compresses, this is going upwards, okay? So as this goes upward, these shims compress and oil flows through it. These shims here compress and oil comes through, okay? So as your fork goes back down, that's where your rebound shim stack comes in. These on top are your rebound shim stack. Now there's a lot of science to it. You know, that's just simple terms how this works. These have what we call a leaf spring mid valve. A whole nother, complication in itself. The older ones have springs in here, a literal spring like you find, about the size of what you'd find in a pin. And that they hold your valve stack up tight against the piston. That's, you get into float and lift and all those things. But these have a leaf setup, which works just like a leaf spring on a truck. Now, we're not gonna get too deep into that because there is a lot that goes into it. If you don't know about that really, guys, you probably need to just give this to a professional suspension tuner. Here at HBR, we'd be happy to revalve it for you. We get stuff shipped in, all the time, so we can help you out. Just contact us, check us out on Facebook and whatever if you want to do that. But if you're already familiar with all that, this is essentially how you pull it apart. This is going to be the same way as our base valve. You're going to grind this or file this down because this one has not, the mid valve has not been revalved. We just made some minor changes on the base valve, tested out, see what that felt like, and now we have to do the mid valve. So again, grind that down, you'll back your nut off. It's the same deal. Once you guys have got this ground down smooth, this nut should come off with minimal to no resistance. If you've got resistance still, that means you are not, ground down far enough. You're gonna possibly risk damaging the threads, and that's not something you wanna do. You're gonna have to buy a new, this end valve holder. This is a whole piece. And then you're waiting on that, and it's not fun. So I can take this off. Once I cracked it loose, the initial force, I can take this off with my fingers. You want a seal pick like this, just a flat one. And you are going to stick it just right there in the end of that. And you're gonna slide this whole setup. My seal pick wasn't very clean, but we're gonna clean all this off before it goes back on. So just slide that to the end. So on these, we got a couple shims down here. It might take a magnet or a little bit of spray to get these off because the oil is kind of making a suction to it. So be careful that you don't pull this off and leave some shims here because obviously these have a function too. Very important. Every shim in here is. So we're gonna set that down and then we're gonna work on getting these off. I'm just gonna take a magnet and get them to pull off that way. All right, guys, so as I was editing this video, I did notice that one of the clips got cut out of there somehow. It's just a short clip showing me laying all the valve shims out. Unfortunately, I'm not going to pull the forks completely back apart and off the bike. I wish I would have caught it sooner and I could have laid them out for you guys, but that would be the next step here that I leave out. So you just want to lay your shims down in the stack in order and then make your adjustments, or if you're building a stack from scratch, that'd be what you do here. Then you put the mid valve back together. Don't forget your Loctite. all your shims are going to go in the order that you need, using your correct shims, different sizes, whatever you've done. So one of the most important steps after you get all your valving back on here, once you get your piston on, and then you've got this washer at the top on the SSS, you will put your nut back on, but do not forget your Loctite. And I highly recommend using name brand Loctite, true Loctite brand. I believe 263 or 271, the red Loctite. That stuff is the way to go. So don't cheap out and use some, you know, Harbor Freight Loctite or something. Stuff like this does not need to come apart, especially inside your forks, because when this stuff comes off, it goes everywhere, it gets smashed up, and I've seen it happen, so don't do that. But we've got it back together, we got our Loctite on. Don't over tighten these, the threads are not great. This is like aluminum here, so obviously use your head. Find your torque specs, and be really careful with these. So we've got our base valve back together too. Same deal, Loctite, it works the same way. So now that these are together, we're gonna get our fork put back together. Take our inner cartridge here, if you guys can see that. And we are going to take our rod with our new setup. Make sure this thing's really clean. I'm gonna go ahead and spray it off real quick. Yeah, it's very clean, so I'm not too worried about it, but so I just cleaned that up, sprayed it off camera with some suspension cleaner. I'm gonna wipe it down a little bit. And what I like to do on something like this, it's gonna have a little bit of resistance going back in. So I'll coat it with just a little bit of oil, help it slide down in there. My hands are spotless clean. So we remember our orientation. Obviously this is going to go down. Okay, so once you've got, I don't know if you can see it, once you've got that piston in there in the groove, well, in the cup at the bottom, you can take, it's going to have a little resistance because of those threads down here. Be careful, don't force it, but you can take like your damping rod or something, and just give it a little bit of a poke. And like I say, it doesn't take much just to get that down. There's a little bit of stiction there from these seals in here, and we don't have oil in it or anything yet, so that's the resistance you're going to be pushing against. So now that we've got that in there, we're going to set this in our vise, and we're going to fill up the oil, and we'll walk through that process. Okay guys, so now that we've got our fork, our inner cartridge here in this holding tool, we will fill this up with fork fluid, and I've already done so here. So on inner cartridges like these on the SSS and similar forks, there's no set number. You don't put in, say 200 cc and you're done. No, it's not like an outer chamber where you just put in 330, 340, whatever specific number. These have to be full to the top. So we've poured our oil in. After you pour your oil in, it's roughly gonna be around 220 cc's to be safe. You want a little bit more. I don't measure it out because I've done these so often. I can see where the oil level is. I know that we're pretty close. Because what's gonna happen, we're gonna bleed this fork, and what this is doing is getting all your air bubbles out and sucking your oil down in. And you can hear mine, there's no air in it. You'll be able to tell when you're doing this, you'll hear the air bubbles and feel it. And then once you've got this bled out good, you're gonna look in the top and make sure there's no bubbles sitting on top, anything like that, because you definitely don't want that. That will cause the oil to potentially be foamy and stuff. So no bubbles in this one. It had to sit for, a minute or two to get all that to come to the top and get out of there. So what we do now is, like I said, we've got roughly 220-ish cc's of wool in there. And we'll take our base valve, make sure it's good and clean. We've cleaned this one up. And our base valve, I might have just a little bit too much oil, is gonna go down in here. Okay, so I took just a little bit of oil out, maybe 10 cc's, and we've got it a lot closer. We can see our threads are closer here. So Now, what we're gonna do, and these steps are important, so don't miss these next few steps. But we're gonna press down, and as we do, we're gonna tighten that. And so just tighten it back up. Don't get crazy with it. It doesn't take a lot, but we'll put our fork cap ring back. Okay, so we got that good and snug. Okay guys, so now that we have got our base valve assembly back in, our oil is in, no more bubbles in it, what we're gonna do is we're gonna bleed this thing out. So we're gonna compress it, and oil is gonna come out of this hole, or any air excess oil. So, also I forgot, off camera I stuck this nut back on here. Don't forget that, because if you try to bleed this out and you go past the threads without this nut, you're gonna have a mess. So don't forget that. I'm gonna cover these holes just so they don't get sprayed with oil, but listen and you can hear it. Okay, so what we did is we just compressed this all the way till it bottoms out on that nut. And you can see that oil and air bubbles have came out of these holes here. We're gonna do this a couple times until no more comes out. You can hear it still coming out. Okay. Usually 3 or 4 times should be good. So that was the third, I believe, and it's good. So no more air coming out. So now what we want to make sure of is that as we do this, our cartridge or our rod is extending all the way back out. And you can see it's at the very bottom here. We want this to come all the way back out. If you don't, something's wrong in here, you don't have enough oil, you've got air, something like that going on, and the fork's not going to feel good. So make sure that happens. And now we are ready to reassemble if we're not doing fork seals. Now, if you are doing fork seals, what's going to happen, you're going to take a screwdriver or something and pop this dust seal off. There's going to be a retainer clip in here you'll pull out, and then you can just hammer this in your actual fork seal. As you slide this upwards, you're going to pop that seal out, and then it's pretty obvious. Just keep everything in order and put the seals back in the same way, your new seals. I'm not getting too deep into that. There's a lot of videos on the internet about throwing seals in. It's very straightforward once you're at this point. So now what we're going to do, our seals are still brand new, so we're going to put our fork back together. Different people do this different ways. What I do is this way. It's pretty easy. Now, at this point, if you've got preload spacers, don't forget to put them in. They're going to go at the bottom on this fork, which we've got this upside down. This is going to be the bottom, obviously. You'll put it right there, then put your fork back together. We've got our damping rod here. We want to make sure that's very clean. What we can also do is spray a little bit of cleaner through it. I know all this stuff is super clean, but we're going to spray through anyways. We want that cleaner out of it. That stuff dries really quick, evaporates. So now that we're at this point, just make sure, push on this, kind of make sure it springs back up just to check the function, make sure everything's working well. Now we will take our outer tube. We're just going to slide it all down on. Okay, so once we've got that on there, we're going to take our cartridge holding tool, make sure it's clean. And same step, we compressed our spring and we put this on our cartridge to hold this so we can tighten our cap back on there. So we're going to also spray this off, same thing, make sure it's clean. One big thing about suspension is making sure everything's clean. So I'm going to just screw this on, get it roughly hand tight. Now make sure also that this nut right here on your rod itself is all the way down when you start to do this process. And then we're going to take our 17 on the top cap, take our 15 here, and we're going to tighten these. Okay, so now that we've got these two tightened up, that meshes up against this, we got it good and tight. We can compress our fork and take our rod holder, cartridge holder back out, and we can take our 17 and then just tighten this up into the fork itself. Now that we're all tightened up, one of our last steps here is to get our correct oil capacity here. We're doing 330. I recommend using one of these specific to forks because these beakers are more narrow and we can get an exact oil level, whereas a mixing cup like this tapers so much your oil amount is not going to be as accurate. So if you're really tuning suspension, something like this is a good investment. We're going to fill this up. We can screw this back down, and we'll put this back in our fork vise and just tighten the cap up, and that's where we're done. Now, if you've completely revalved this, your clicker settings are going to be different, and so that's, you know, you'll adjust those obviously. But that is our last step there. That's how you do it. It's relatively simple to pull the fork apart if you've got the correct tools, you've got the place and the bench and stuff to do it. Keeping everything clean is important, but if you're revalving them, that is where the whole extra complication comes in, which it's iffy whether it's worth it to buy your own fork tools. I mean, if you're planning on keeping the same bike for a long time, I guess it's probably worth it, but for the price we do them for here at HBR, $75 labor for just a general rebuild. For that, is it really worth, you know, spending 30 bucks on, you know, seal tools? Then you've got your seal bullets. You're gonna have to have these two. Really, you're gonna need to take the inner cartridge apart pretty much every time, get that old oil out. And then obviously your fork cap wrench, which I don't know what I've done with it, but every fork is different. So, it's up to you, you know, like I say, if you're keeping the same bike for a long time, maybe invest in it, but give us a shout if you want us to rebuild or revalve your suspension. So now we're done.